Hello and welcome to week 7. This week, uh, today, I am sitting in my hotel room in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to go explore the Stones River Civil War battlefield, and we're going to go on there. And this whole week is going to be filled with fun and excitement. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm going into Gatlinburg, and then I'm going to be doing other things. But this week, I wanted to talk to you about the soiled doves. Okay. And throughout the history of the world, the first recorded prostitution within our world history um, was recorded back in the Sumerian Empire at about 2000 BC. Okay. Prostitutes at that time were well respected. They were treated as a temporary wife, as a short-term companion. They were well read. They could hold a conversation with anybody. These temple prostitutes in the Sumerian Empire would provide services for the nobility and the royalty, and even the deities that they represented and the kings of the Sumerian Empire. The practice of exchanging sex for favors or money has been an accepted way of life in many cultures throughout time and throughout history. The temple prostitutes of Ishtar and Aphrodite were held in a place of honor. In fact, some of the Mediterranean cultures required women to serve as temple prostitutes. And especially before they got married, if they were about to be married, the 2 weeks prior to the wedding, they had to serve as a temple prostitute in the temples of Ishtar. Yeah, but these temple prostitutes entertained rulers, visiting priests, important members of society, landholders, slaveholders. Um, they rubbed elbows with some of the most important people in society. And they gave a portion of their money back to the temple. The temple would in turn use that money to help with social welfare programs and things to that nature. On another note, and I guess this is relevant till today, the male prostitutes within the Temple of Ishtar would remove their genitalia. They would cut off their male body parts and leave a gashing hole there where the body parts used to be, so that they could pose as women and they could also provide sexual favors. So when you hear people today talk about this transgender gender surgery being a new thing, it's not. It's been around since 2000 BC. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying that it's been around for a while, and it was part of the practice for worshiping pagan gods. Okay. The most beautiful women within the temples of Ishtar and Aphrodite were actually sacrificed so that they could go serve Aphrodite and Ishtar. But that was a long time ago. That was then, this is now. So let's move forward to the 19th century, to the 1800s. The 19th century Europe, prostitution was illegal, but the police rarely enforced it. Nobody enforced prostitution. Okay. As we've gone through and we've come through the ages of the Mosaic Code, and then we kind of backslid into the Roman era and Aphrodite. And then Christianity took over. And as Christianity took over, they started to frown upon prostitution. And again, it was illegal, but it was not prosecuted. Much like substance abuse here in many states, or the use of marijuana here in many states, it's illegal, but nobody prosecutes it. It's non-prosecutorial. So because it's non-prosecutorial, people would seek the services that are provided by the prostitutes. Several members of the royalty, uh, the King of France is known, the kings, not just king, but the kings of France, were well known for maintaining a mistress. She was nothing more than a prostitute, but you couldn't call her a prostitute because she was sleeping with the king, even though the king was married to somebody else. If you've ever seen The Serpent Queen, it's on Stars, and they show and they depict this form of prostitution that went on within the royal ranks of European royalty. The regular ladies of the night were looked down upon. They were scorned and ridiculed for being prostitutes. When Jack the Ripper in the 1880s started killing prostitutes in the East End of London, it's believed, it was thought that Prince Albert was this serial killer known as Jack the Ripper. There's a lot of discussion and a lot of debate on who Jack the Ripper was, but in England and in Europe, the regular ladies of the night were frowned upon, they were scorned. And it wasn't any different in the United States. In the United States, the strict mores of prostitution is a form of uh, promiscuity, and sex outside of wedlock is considered a sin within the Puritan world. And thus, so it made it extremely hard for the prudish Puritan Americans to accept prostitution. And everywhere they went, they made it illegal. But then there was the West, the wild, wild West. And last week we talked about Al Swearingen, who put ads in East Coast newspapers promising jobs of waitresses and housekeeping and nursemaids and all of that to induce or entice women to come to Deadwood, where he would beat them and force them into prostitution. He was a human trafficker. But this wasn't the case for all the women, the soiled doves that came out to the out west to buy a trade. And there were very few women on the frontier in 1849. In fact, the statistics in the studies show that there were 2 women for every 100 men. There were tens and thousands, or thousands and hundreds of thousands of men that left the East Coast. They left the east side of the Mississippi, where I'm sitting now, crossed the Mississippi and went into the West and went into Texas and Deadwood and Kansas and the cattle towns and the mining camps, looking for fame and fortune, just like the men. The women wanted adventure and money. But manhood was established in the Wild West by how tough he was, by how fast he could draw his gun, by how much whiskey he could drink. brawn and good health were more important in the Wild West than intelligence and education. Okay. Because running cattle or mining gold or mining silver took a tough, strong man. And there was no time for reading and writing and reading the classics, Dante's Inferno and Homer and the letters and the sermons of John Winthrop, William Shakespeare. Men in the West didn't have time for that. They considered it nonsense. The first women to arrive onto the plains were women of easy virtue. And they were not your prim and proper women. They were, in fact, women who were willing to lay down with any guy. Okay. Some come looking for a husband, a rich husband. Most came for looking for money and adventure, just like the men. The men came out west to find fame and glory and money and adventure. So not everybody that went out west decided to be cowboys or silver miners or gold miners. Some went to be storekeepers. Some went to be police officers. Some went to be saloon keepers. Al Swearingen went to make money and traffic in human flesh. But every town, every community that we had or we found within the West, whether it's Deadwood or San Angelo or Odessa, they all had their red light districts. And some of these red light districts still exist today. But within these red light districts, they would become the social cultural centers of the community because that's where the women were. That's where these women were. Okay. They would be actresses like Josephine. They would be singers. They would be dancers. They would go to the dance halls and they would dance hurdy-gurdy. If there was enough money, they would provide sexual favors as well in exchange for money or favors. The going price back in the 1870s, 1880s for a poke with a prostitute really bothered me when Facebook started their little poke thing. But anyway, I digress. The cost to receive or to receive sexual favors and services from the prostitutes was a day's wage. Mm-hmm. So if it was hold on a second. Yes, I'm making a movie. Say hi to everybody. All right, that's my son Jacob. I'm sorry for his interruption. Again, I am in a hotel room. He was wanting me to see a video. So it was about a day's wage. So if it was a cowboy, it was probably about $2. If it was a gold miner, it was $5 or $6. Silver miner, again, $5 or $6, depending on how much money they were making and how much money they were finding in this in the mines. If you're a rich banker, you would pay more than that, and on and so forth. And so these women, they provided more than just sexual favors and the pleasures of the flesh. Many were extremely kind-hearted women. They provided companionship to lonely men. A lot of times you would see a miner sitting on the bed in one of these prostitutes' shacks. So they're cribs. They're called cribs. And she would be mending his clothes. She would be washing his clothes. She would do the perform the obligations of a wife uh, of that time. She, like I said, she would sew, she would mend clothes, she'd wash the back of his neck and his ears, and bathe him, help him get clean. And then, of course, there's always the sexual part, but they were also the first nurses. They were the first nurses to go into the West. If there was a regular customer that they had, they would be nursed back to health. If they fell ill, they were the nurses of the area and the territory. The mere presence of these women would provide a sobering effect on the men in the room, and even today, you find that depending upon the woman that's in the room, men are going to act differently. And this was no different than back then. Granted, these women were uh, ladies of the night. They're painted ladies, different names for them. Um, but there was a quote that comes out and it said that many a miner wouldn't bathe or comb their hair or wash their face or shave if it wasn't for the attention of these sporting ladies. Um, when the respectable women started to show up, uh, they fixed up the shacks, they fixed up the houses, they planted pretty flowers, uh, they built schools and churches, and then the clergy would appear. The soiled doves uh, did not belong to this new morality that was coming into the area um, because of all the good women that had arrived. And these good women insisted that the soiled doves um, be fined for plying their trade, for something that they've been doing out there in the West um, for 20 to 30 years. We had active prostitutes in every major community in the west of the Mississippi. And as the women started crossing, the good women started crossing the Mississippi, we started seeing that they um, frowned upon prostitution. They wanted prostitutes to be punished. This might have something to do with the fact that the prostitutes were servicing their husbands. Um, but most of the soiled doves would move outside of the city limits so that the city marshal had no control over them. And then they would move on and they would take care of the things that they do. Most American women of the frontier would become prostitutes. Okay? They, um, most of them were caught in a situation which they had no control. Um, like Al Swearengen's girls at the Gem Theater, they came because of the promise of employment. Employment predominantly belonged to the men. Okay? Women didn't go into the mines. The women didn't run cattle. They didn't go on cattle drives. So regardless of the education from the proper finishing schools that these women may have received back east, they were only offered the most menial and lowest paid work as seamstresses and maids and nannies, uh, if there were children out there, some of the major ranchers. Uh, but even, we discussed 2 weeks ago, we were discussing Chisholm and Murphy and uh, Tunstall. None of them were married. None of them had wives. They were single. They used the services of the prostitutes, but they didn't have children. So there was no need for educated women to come out west. So those women, for those women who were alone, they had been widowed, they'd come out here on the frontier with their husbands. Their husbands died, was killed by the Indians. The only work they could get was as a seamstress or a laundress doing other people's laundry. Um, some women would move automatically. They'd go to acting and singing and dancing, and prostitution was the next level step. Several women enjoyed this profession and became willing participants in the lifestyle of prostitution. These women, although used for their silks or their skills in silks and being ladies of the night, they were still looked down upon. They were called names. They were ridiculed. And I know I've referenced the movie Young Guns a couple times, especially back when we're talking about the Lincoln County War. But one of Billy the Kid's most favorite female companions was a madam, a prostitute in White Oaks, New Mexico. And I don't remember her name off the top of my head, and I'm not going to look it up. But she had a monologue that was given in the movie that has been shown to be accurate to the point that, yes, she said something like this. When Billy the Kid and the regulators showed up at the brothel, the good citizens of the town came with torches and pitchforks and threatened to burn the brothel down and arrest her. Her first name was Joan. And she said that, she goes, "How dare you look down on me and insult me? But you're here as soon as the sun goes down with your $5 for me to service you or for one of my girls to service you." And that's the way that it worked and the way that it operated. People would look down, they would insult, they would ridicule the prostitutes, but they would in turn come, after church, come Monday morning, they're back to the brothel seeking services. Very few, but some did become extremely wealthy. They became madams. In Deadwood, we talked about Madam Mustache and Dirty M. But these women of easy virtue would spread a web of good deeds. Their silk stockings, their elaborate dress, their sexual favors brought a lot of money into the community. And these women contributed to local charities. They gave to the churches. They gave to the hospitals. They were always the first to lend a helping hand in times of crisis. Okay. During a flu epidemic in Saltese, Montana, the local madam had all of her girls within her brothel go into town and nurse the ill. Several lives were saved because of these prostitutes, because of these women, these soiled doves that were frowned upon, that were ridiculed. When something was needed to be done in the community normally went to the soiled doves. They went to these girls. They were frowned upon, so they couldn't participate in social events. So the money that they were being given from the men that were hiring them, they kept them. Okay. Granted, most of the madams would charge 40%. the 40 to 60%. Then that 40 to 60% provided protection and safety, security. It gave you a room, it gave you food, and it gave you clothes. So that remaining 40 to 60%, most of the time it was 40%, these soiled doves were able to keep this money, and then they would give it away. They would share it, just like the prostitutes in Aphrodite and Ishtar's time. They would help the community with the money that they were making, even though they were supporting debauchery. Okay, so some of the most famous or the wealthiest madams, soiled doves, ladies of the night, sporting women. Sporting women today, you would think of soccer players or softball players or basketball players. You wouldn't think that a sporting lady would be one that would lay down and provide sexual favors. But Josephine Hensley, well, before I get to this list, we can go back to Wyatt Earp. Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan Earp, the Earp brothers. They were all married to prostitutes. They were common law married. They took care of these women. These women were identified as the wives of the Earps, but they still plied their trade. They still provided sexual favors for others in the community. They would just come and share that money that they made with the Earps. Josephine, Wyatt Earps, you guys, a lot of you mentioned the love triangle between Behan and Josephine, the fight over her affections. She came to Tombstone as a actress, but as we've already mentioned, these actresses are also prostitutes, and so was Josephine. When she started her relationship and when she married Wyatt Earp, she stopped being an actress and she stopped being a prostitute, and they were officially legally married. But some of these other women, famous women, Josephine Hensley, Veronica Baldwin, Maddie Silks, Miss Hattie, and Mildred Clark Causey. Okay. Miss Hattie and Mildred Clark Causey started out as Harvey girls. And the Harvey girls were, this guy by the name of Harvey owned train depots all across the West, Kansas and Texas and New Mexico and Arizona and California. And when the trains would stop and people would get off the trains, Harvey's girls would meet them. They would take them to the diner. They'd take them to go find food. They would help them find a hotel. They were hostesses at the Harvey hotels. And then they were also prostitutes. Miss Hattie was in San Angelo. Her museum, her brothel was finally raided and shut down by the Texas Rangers in 1976. Miss Hattie's brothel first opened when Fort Concho opened on the east side of the Concho River. Miss Hattie's opened her brothel on the west side of the Concho River in 1871, 1872. It was a frontier fort. Miss shows up. She has a couple girls, and their job is to provide services to the soldiers. And then when the Buffalo soldiers got to San Angelo, Miss Hattie went and found some Buffalo prostitutes that would be willing to service the Buffalo soldiers. Unlike the men in the Army, the African-American men were not readily accepted. They were in segregated units. the African-American women were welcomed with open arms in the ranks of prostitution. So Miss Hattie, I know she wasn't the same madam that was running around in 1873 and then in 1976. I'm sure that there was different madams. They all called themselves Miss Hattie. She would take her girls to church every Sunday in very colorful gowns. And then, you know, on the wagon, she would drive them through town every Sunday after church, advertising that the brothel will be open promptly at 2 p.m. Men would play cards while they were waiting their turn with the girls. Mildred Clark Causey, she was from Silver City, New Mexico. Her brothel was originally opened in the 19 teens. And she was 75 years old in the also in 1976, 77, when her brothel was shut down. But her daughter continued it, and it wasn't. Prostitution was still acceptable in Silver City, New Mexico until the 80s. I'm kind of thinking it's still going on, kind of like in Deadwood. But if any of you saw the TV show Gunsmoke, Gunsmoke was modeled, Miss Kitty in Gunsmoke was modeled after Mildred Clark Causey, a very famous, very wealthy prostitute. So other madams would take their girls out to the camps, and they'd go on summer vacation. They'd set up tents, and they would allow these girls to ply their trade with the men that couldn't make it to town. Okay, so hopefully this was a very enlightening 30 minutes. Gave you a little bit of a better idea of what's going on with the soiled doves in the Wild Wild West. I will see you guys in the forums.